Okay, well, we'll dive into our next panel discussion here. We've got a great panel of distinguished guests with us. Again, I'm Derek Wagner with Colorado Mesa University. I'm going to go down the line and just let every one of our panelists introduce themselves and talk for just a second about your organization and maybe kind of your interest in this issue a little bit. And then we'll kind of circle back and just kind of walk through the progression of this issue as it's sort of evolved over the years. So, David, you want to start?
Thank you, Derek. My name is David Ludlam. I represent the natural gas industry here in northwest Colorado, the 7 counties of northwest Colorado from Moffett down to Delta. We represent largely the Piceance Basin, but also the Sandwash, and we have tremendous natural gas reserves that have a direct corollary interest to this project, and I'm excited to be here to talk about it today.
Right, you guys just obviously heard from me. We're really excited about this project, and I'm just going to pass it on at this point.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm Rose Pugliese. I'm a Mesa County Commissioner, and I deal a lot with public lands issues and also oil and gas. And I've been very engaged for the last several years on the Jordan Cove project and what it can do for not just Mesa County, but for a lot of our communities on the western slope. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mike McKee, and I was a county commissioner over in Uena County, across the border in Utah there for 14 years. And today I'm the executive director of 7 County Coalition. But much like my colleague here, I've been very involved in public land issues. Most of the natural gas in the state of Utah comes out of eastern Utah. So this is a very exciting project, I think, in the entire region.
Great, thank you all. So I can't pass up an opportunity for a quick commercial about Colorado Mesa in terms of our involvement in this project, and just kind of give you a sense on why is our university involved in a project like this. So a number of years ago, 2011, 2012, our university set up what we call the Unconventional Energy Center, and we've got a $3.5 million endowment that we manage, and we spend the proceeds from that endowment every single year on things like applied research projects, on enhancing the public dialogue about energy issues, which is why we're a sponsor of an event like this every year. So one of the projects that we got approached to help support, it's got to be 4 years ago now, was this Piceance to the Pacific Rim initiative in terms of trying to identify and support the development of new markets for natural gas here in western Colorado. So David was one of the primary proponents of that project with our local economic development crowd. So David, I thought if maybe you could kind of talk a little bit about the development and the history of that Piceance to Pacific Rim initiative, and then we'll kind of transform into how that's developed into this Western States Rural Natural Gas Initiative.
Sure. I, as the father of a 9- and 7-year-old, 2 little girls, I tend to process everything through the lens of parenthood right now. And I think about the greatest generation parents. We're sort of the I might need that someday generation. My grandfather recycled baling wire and reused baling twine and kept everything because he, quote, might need it someday. And they moved on and came the baby boomers, who were sort of the we didn't have all that much, let's give our kids everything generation. And then came along my generation of parenting, and we're like this is a real thing, we're the picky eater generation. And if you have kids right now, you know that this is true. We have at least 5 friends who, you come over for a barbecue, and you've got hamburgers, you got all set out, and they say, yeah, we packed our kids meals because they're picky eaters. And it's like, well, if you took that away for 24 hours, their pickiness might go down. But the idea, what I sort of am getting at is that this idea that abundance equals blindness sometimes. Abundance equals sort of an inability to see the bigger picture. And this project, the Piceance to the Pacific Rim Initiative, really brought that concept home for me. We had the energy minister of Lithuania come to Grand Junction at the university's invitation. And he was laughing at us, the debates we have about energy, about what's the best way to create electrons and how we should do things. He said, we've been occupied more than any country in the history of the world. We're living under the shadow of the previous Iron Curtain. We have no natural resources. I took him to Cabela's, and he couldn't believe that you could buy a gun or a bow and arrow over the counter. He said only the aristocracy in our country even gets to go on public lands and hunt, let alone just walking in and buying it. And this idea that we have this energy abundance here, we have the second largest natural gas reserve in the country. We have the best uranium plutonium reserves. We have the biggest, cleanest, low sulfur coal reserves. We have all these potential resources, but we, because of the abundance, in the same way that we're picky eaters, we just, we take it for granted. And the second thing that came from this project was just recently, energy minister from Japan reached out to Commissioner Pugliese and me and a few others that have been involved and said, we want to fly to Grand Junction. We want to talk. Okay. And in typical Japanese fashion, it took a good hour to get to the point, but they ultimately did. And he said, what you guys are doing with this project is amazing. We're reading about it back home, and we think your reserves and what you have to offer the world is worth fighting for. And, thank you for what you're doing. I think I'm paraphrasing a 2-hour dinner. But, I think the Jordan Cove project is a part of the Piance to the Pacific Rim initiative, but it's not the only thing. And the reason it's been successful is because, unlike so many things that we do as an industry, everything about it was aspirational. It wasn't technocratic. We weren't telling people about why it made sense in the terms of what it would generate. We were talking about why it makes sense for a better, safer world, why it will improve people's lives here and overseas, why it could make a community that often has become self-reflective as having limitations. We're victims of boom and bust. We can't do anything, into being a community that sees itself as being having a geopolitical resource that's geopolitically relevant and that could change the world. And I think that's why the Piance to the Pacific Rim initiative got so much traction. Name one other project in the country, a significant energy project, that's gotten the endorsement of a Democratic governor, a Democratic senator, the two, I'll just name them, Governor Hickenlooper, Senator Bennett, Senator Gardner, Congressman Tipton, almost every elected official in this room on this side of the Continental Divide, the Denver Post, the Grand Junction Daily Sentinel. The list just goes on and on. How did we do that? It was aspirational. And so the Piance to the Pacific Rim really, it was an opportunity for, I think, all of our community to come together and focus our efforts on a project that can deliver our energy resources to new markets in a way that will that has meaning for humanity, but also meaning for our local economy. And I think that the Western States Rural Natural Gas Initiative is the beneficiary of this initial energy that was created from the Piance to the Pacific Rim Initiative. I don't think I would call it the next iteration, but I mean, I think that's a good, healthy way to look at it, is that we're trying to take what we accomplished around this and make it maybe the Piance to the Pacific Rim on steroids, an interstate project. And that's, I think, where Kathleen and our friends in Utah, Commissioner Pugliese, and many others elected officials in the room are approaching this project. So is that kind of what you were looking for, Derek, in terms of a summary of the background of Piance to the Pacific Rim?
Yeah, I think that's great, and I share your view on parenting. It's certainly not easy. So I think that's exactly right in terms of given that history about how we've been kind of get that coalition together in Western Colorado and Northwest Colorado and engage our congressional delegation and our state leaders in, trying to embrace this concept and move it forward. So Kathleen, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how we've taken that baseline work, I think, and what the governor's interest was in picking that up and having that conversation with Governor Herbert across the border, and trying to, what is that next iteration of this effort kind of emanating from Western Colorado, and where do you kind of see this going with Colorado and Utah together?
Well, I'd first like to say I'm fully on board with starving my children if they're not going to eat what I've served. But I think, one of the things that has been really exciting, I think, from our standpoint is Governor Hickenlooper has a lot of interest and gets really excited about opportunities to work with other states on projects, particularly that have regional significance. And I think, because the Piance and the Uinta Basin are geologically connected, and we've got essentially the same base of resources here, it made a lot of sense for us to start to partner with Utah. And in thinking about how much momentum was behind the support from the governor and the congressional delegation, finding ways to expand that and have it be a bigger, more collaborative effort on a regional basis was something that's really appealing. And so when we started having these conversations with Utah, we immediately found that we were on the same page. This was something that was obviously going to benefit our communities that are in western Colorado and eastern Utah, but the economies of our state, and looking longer term for how we're using our resources. Building on that, we've developed this study that Derek has mentioned that CMU was generous enough to fund, and we've got actually several operators and local governments, both from Utah and Colorado, who are pitching in some funding to support this project as well, and really looking at setting this baseline. What is taking the Piance to Pacific Rim information and expanding that to the Uinta so that we can have a better picture of the full set of resources, what kind of infrastructure is already in place, what potential markets are out there, both internationally and domestically, and what will it take to actually access and develop those markets. And so really having a robust stakeholder process through this so that we can have a conversation about truly what are the opportunities and the barriers and challenges, and that we can start to think through what those might look like, both from a political standpoint or a regulatory standpoint or even an environmental standpoint, having those conversations now so that we've got a realistic path forward to turning this into an actual viable market development for our very abundant natural gas resources, and having this clean source of energy, not just domestically here in Colorado and in Utah, but that other states and other countries can benefit from this as well. And so we're really excited about the momentum that's behind this, the input, the potential benefits and impacts to our communities from a long-term standpoint. This is not just, this would not just be a short-term project. The results of this, when we develop these markets, if we can, when Jordan Cove gets off the ground and we've got other opportunities to actually get our gas to these places, is really significant long-term for both of our states. So I feel an equal amount of enthusiasm from our counterparts in Utah, and really excited to continue that work.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Pugliese, are you in favor of starving children? Let's start there.
I don't know. I'm not the greatest mom in that respect, because I'm traveling so much that I overindulge them, absolutely. So I'm the opposite of all of you. No, they are picky, and I give into it, so
Okay.
I don't starve them. No, thank you.
In all seriousness, if you could talk a little bit about kind of why has Mesa County been kind of helping lead this effort? What are your interests in doing it? What are some of the things that you all have been doing in terms of kind of taking the project and advocating both at the state and national level? And just kind of talk a little bit about kind of that nexus between the project and local government. I think that'd be helpful.
Okay, great. And so I'll start from the beginning. So I sit on the Grand Junction Economic Partnership Board. I actually sit on all of the economic development boards in Mesa County. And so when this project came up, I thought, wow, that's a great project, but didn't really see my role. And then I got an email saying, hey, we need you to go to Washington, D.C. and testify before this subcommittee of the Natural Resources Committee of Congress and talk about the Manco Shale of the Piance Basin. And I was like, wow, it's kind of I do a lot with public lands. It's a little bit out of my bailiwick. And so as I was connecting the dots in my world on this project, it was really great to be able to advocate to Congress saying, hey, listen, we've got a ridiculous amount of resources. We have an abundance of resources, more than we ever even thought that we had. And so how do we take those resources and use them for the benefit of others as well? And so, and I also want to say, I've not been the only lead on this. So, Commissioner Sampson, I see him sitting right there. Commissioner Justman from Mesa County. There are plenty of people I'm sure I'm not seeing in this room, Bonnie Peterson. And so David had called me right after I had testified and said, hey, there's an opportunity to actually go out to Jordan Cove and check out the project. And so being able to see the project for myself was really amazing. But really the best part of this is the relationship building. With our partners in Utah, but also with commissioners in Oregon and their legislators and people who support the project and their chambers of commerce. And what I realized was there was an incredible opportunity because Mesa County and a lot of our Western Slope counties are very much like Coos Bay, Oregon, and some of those other rural communities where Portland's doing great and everybody thinks the state's doing great, but the rural communities are really struggling, mostly because we have an abundance of public lands. And so, as I always say, the federal government actually controls our economy way more than we are able to. And so taking that in mind, being able to take our resources and figure out a way to market them for the benefit of all of us collectively has been really important. And so after that project, we continued to talk, and then as David had talked about, this trade minister from Japan, reached out and said, hey, I want to come to Grand Junction, Colorado. And you're like, wow, what do I do with a trade minister from Japan? Now, mind you, I was a Japanese minor in college, so that worked out really well for me. But it was great to be able to get commissioners from our region together to talk to him about the importance. And what was really very eye-opening for me is that he didn't care just about Japan, but he was talking about how do we take this resource and use it for the benefit of all of Asia. And then as David had said, I mean, Eastern Europe is depending on Russia for their gas. Wouldn't it be better for geopolitical stabilization? Wouldn't we all want to be part of that conversation to help them become independent from Russia and be able to get their resources from the United States? And we have an administration that's very supportive, not just in the state, but also nationally. And so how do we use that and capitalize on that to talk about the resources we have and how do we get to market those? And so we've had such a great coalition of people working together. This isn't just one person's effort, this is all of our efforts. And this really is truly one of the only projects that I have worked on as a commissioner in my almost 6 years that we do have a bipartisan delegation of people on the national level, the state level, and then also even on a commissioner level that are all engaged in this project and all see the benefit for all of us. The question I get the most that I always find to be amusing, because you talk about this, right? So for years we've been talking about this. So the question I get the most is, why does Mesa County, why does Colorado care about a project in Coos Bay, Oregon? And you're like, wow, I feel like I've told like 20 people about this and that they all know what the connection is. But when we go to DC, they don't know the connection. And as we go and talk to people in Department of Interior and the State Department, they're like, why do you care? And why we care is because the gas would be coming from the western Colorado and being supplied through Oregon to Coos Bay and then over to Japan and Asia and other places. And so I think getting that message across has been really important. And so the more people we have in our Army talking about that, I think is really very phenomenal. And so we appreciate what the Energy Office is doing to collectively work with our neighbors in Utah and potentially Wyoming to collectively market our natural gas resources. And the last thing I'm going to leave you with is I always get a question about, well, you have an abundance of the resource, but I thought we were running out of the resource. Decades ago, we were talking about how there wasn't going to be enough energy. Why is it now we want to export it? Isn't it not as good for our domestic uses if we export it out? And just in the Mancos Shale, the Piceance Basin, someone had told me this, and I keep repeating it, so I hope it's correct, but that we could power, just on that gas, we could power the whole state of California for 50 years. So if that just puts into perspective how much of the resource we have and our ability to export it without hurting us domestically, I think that's really important. So thank you for the questions.
Great, Commissioner. So we're kind of brushing over a lot of this sort of data and kind of the scale of this thing, but David, I wonder if you can maybe, before we get to you, Mike, just kind of give a quick snapshot of the initial conversations we had with our economic development partners were really about the great work that a lot of our operators that are with us today are doing out here in the field to really turn this into less of a prospecting operation and much more of a manufacturing operation. And so if you can kind of talk a little bit about the good work that's being done and why the Piceance might be attractive for some of this overseas investment, why the people from Japan are taking interest, particularly in the Piceance. One of the things I think that we talked about was the kind of overbuilt nature of a lot of our processing capacity. So I think it'd be helpful if you don't mind just kind of talking a little bit about some of those overarching issues that have, I think, gotten attention from folks.
Sure. I'll let Pat correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the Piceance Basin right now, we're at about 1.5 BCF a day, 1.5 billion cubic feet that we process and export every day. And to build on Commissioner Pugliese's analogy to California, maybe Jim Yellico or someone's good at math can do this on their phone real quick, but we have at 1.5 BCF a day times 365 days for a year. That's how much we export a year, divided by 100 million, which is how much is potentially in the Manco Shale. Add on top of that all the traditional formations, which is what we're drilling now. You start to see that at today's production, we could be producing for several hundred years at these volumes. And so that, I mean, it speaks to the question of like, well, what are we going to do with this resource? It's unimaginably large. And why, to answer Derek's question about why is this basin potentially more attractive than others? Well, right now, if you're an investor and you want to get into the Permian Basin, you are going to pay a global premium to get into that basin. You're going to be exposed to a commodity. If you're a natural gas utility in Asia, you're going to get exposed to a commodity, i.e. oil, that you don't need and you don't want to have to manage for. And you're going to pay the highest prices in the world. If you come to the Piceance Basin, we have natural gas. We don't have oil. There's less risk involved with managing other commodities. There's minimal processing in the Manco Shale to get the gas to pipeline spec for liquefaction and export. We have producers that are, at this time, private and nimble and can make non-traditional deals, meaning that if you're an Asian utility, you're thinking about the survival of your country, not whether you like wind or solar or gas or nuclear. But so you're looking to buy all of your energy, not in 3-month hedges, but in 30-year sort of contracts or agreements. And so probably those things, plus I think maybe the biggest one, and this is outlined in the paper, as Derek alluded to, our basin doesn't have to build any infrastructure. We have pipelines going east and west that are both big enough for you to stand up in, that are only half full. And Williams and Enterprise and Summit, the midstream companies that gather the gas and process it and chill it here, are only running at like 50% capacity. So we could double our production with existing infrastructure. Why would that matter to an Asian utility or end user of natural gas? It's eliminating another layer of risk. They don't have to worry about not having the ability to get that gas to market in a very reliable way. So those are just a couple examples of some of the things that, as Derek asked about, are sort of technocratic, but they're in the paper and helped us make the case. I know helped Commissioner Pugliese and others who went to Coos Bay talk about why this mattered for us. Does that get to the heart of the question?
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you. Yeah, please do.
The only thing I would add to that, True really is our regulatory scheme. We have very high, strict regulations here in this state, as anybody who's operating here knows. And that is an appealing thing to people who want to purchase our natural gas. When you compare it to natural gas being produced in other places where the standards may not be as high, that's a selling point for our gas. And I think that's another thing that makes the gas produced here an appealing resource.
Great, thanks. So I'd like to bring Mike in now to just kind of talk about kind of across the border, your view on these issues. And, I think a lot of us on this side of the border kind of marvel at Utah doing big things constantly, and whether it's transportation or big infrastructure projects. So if you could kind of just talk a little bit about this effort. I think Kathleen alluded to the fact that geologically speaking, the resource doesn't understand where the state border is. So we call one Uinta and we call one Piceance, but talk a little bit about kind of your view from Utah on this project in particular, and other thoughts you might have to share.
All right, very good. Thank you. Appreciate being able to be here and be able to take that just for a second. To the volume of that natural gas that's been spoken of, but Colorado School of Mines say underneath the Uinta Basin, which extends over here to western Colorado, they claim there's 111 trillion cubic feet of natural gas underneath us. And of course those numbers go up as we get more information, as we do more, as they continue to find more. So it's just a phenomenal amount of gas underneath us, and what a tremendous opportunity. And yet our gas is, from an economic point of view for those of us that live here, it's the cheapest gas in the world. I had an opportunity to be in Estonia a few years ago, which is right up next to Russia. And there was an economist from London that was speaking, and they were talking about natural gas. And essentially what they were saying is the United States will always have the cheapest natural gas in the world. Europe will be next, and Asia's where the price is the highest. And now the laws have been made so that we can export that natural gas. In my mind, it makes really a lot of sense. And then, what's the social benefit of producing the natural gas? Out in my area in the Uinta Basin, we live in mountains are all around us, and so we get some what's called wintertime ozone there a little bit. And so we've had to really look at air quality issues very, very strongly. And what we found with our researchers is that in Asia, with the amount of coal and everything that's in Asia, every 10 years, so to be in compliance with the Clean Air Act on wintertime ozone, you need to be 70 parts per billion or under. Every 10 years, that's going up 5/10. So we go from, and that's because of the air transport. It was mentioned here a little bit earlier. What do we do to keep this bad air, air transport coming from Utah? What we do is we keep it coming in from California that comes into us, so that because it really is. They have traced that air, and they're finding that is coming from Asia. Well, again, as we have clean natural gas, if we can ship that over, there is a component of that's good for us here in America as well, that alone the economy and what that brings to us. And so out where I'm at, Uinta County, they produce 70% of the natural gas produced in the state of Utah. If you take eastern Utah, it's pretty much all of it. The other thing I would just mention too, I was looking at a map here this morning. There are 8 natural gas rigs running in Colorado. There are 12 natural gas rigs up in Wyoming. There's 1 in New Mexico. That is it today in the western United States, because the price of gas is so cheap, and it's difficult for for the people that's trying to produce this to make anything at it when we're under $3 a thousand cubic feet in MCF. So again, if we can improve the markets, if we can make climate better, if we can improve our economies, it seems to me it's win-win-win. I'm not sure where the negative is, and maybe that's why there's such strong bipartisan support everywhere. Thank you.
It is a head scratcher when people can come together, I guess, across different political parties right now. So I think that you're exactly right, that this is one of those things that sort of makes a lot of sense. So I would like to transition into kind of what do you guys see as next steps for this initiative? It's one of the things that, we've been working on the details the last couple iterations of the report, and I think we're going to get into the weeds in terms of what this next iteration or what this initiative between the 2 states looks like. But I wonder if you can kind of share your observations about where do we go from here? How do we continue to pound the drum about expanding markets for our Uinta and Piceance natural gas? Whoever wants to start.
Well, I think that the study itself is actually going to help us identify some concrete paths forward in that space. But I think in the meantime, there are some other opportunities for us to work together on some technical things as other projects arise, and looking at how we might be able to help provide input and data for environmental impact statements for projects that are happening along the West Coast. If there's information and data that we have when it comes to the life cycle of emissions for the gas that gets developed here, I think those are really relevant talking points and data points for the evaluation of projects that are being proposed and are being developed in other places. So I see that there's sort of 2 pieces here. I think we've got some ongoing opportunities. Certainly the education piece is a really important part of this. And then I think longer term, developing this, strengthening this partnership with Utah, engaging with Wyoming, identifying if there's even other opportunities to sort of expand this regional partnership, just from an education and market development standpoint, as we engage with other states and we engage with varying levels of government and all kinds of different stakeholders. I think that there's a lot of potential for this to really turn into something that can have broad-reaching benefits, both economically and environmentally, and really for the energy security for our country and abroad.
Any other thoughts on that point?
So one of the things that I'm working on and continue to work on in developing relationships with the trade minister from Japan is potentially putting together trade ministers from Asia to come to Western Colorado and Eastern Utah and actually look and understand what the resource is. I know David had talked about some of the technical pieces, and I'm sure he'll get into what their needs are. So when they met with us, or when this trade minister met with us, they had some asks as well on the technical pieces of natural gas and getting it to the different places that they need to get it to, which I'm sure David will hit on in a minute. And so being able to offer some expertise to those people, I think, is really good because we do have the infrastructure in place and we know how to do it and do it well and safely. So I think that there'll be some opportunities there. I know some commissioners have talked about potentially sending a delegation of us over to Asia or Japan and talking to their leaders about our resource. So I think that there's going to be a lot of opportunities coming forward in the next few years to continue those relationships. And the broader the coalition, I think the better our message is and the stronger position we put our regions in. Thank you.
Any other thoughts on that? Other thoughts? No?
From the next steps perspective, I'm excited about just the prospect of, I think we have the first MOU between two states from an energy perspective, but working towards, I think, a gubernatorial MOU potentially, which I think doesn't necessarily change what we're working on content-wise, but gives it that extra pump or push forward. So I think the study, as Kathleen mentioned, is really the most important piece in the near term, and I invite everyone in the room to reach out and help us participate in this if you like. Is there a softball we could throw out for making contributions to the project, Derek? I don't know.
Please do. Sure. Yeah. Money's always welcome. Mike, go ahead.
This is really for Kathleen, but maybe she might want to just mention at Utah's Governor Energy Summit, that's going to be laid out just a little bit. Do you want to just, anything you want to, or David, either one?
Well, I'm not sure we're going to be ready yet for the gubernatorial MOU by the Energy Summit in May, but this is something certainly that we're building towards, and Governor Herbert and Governor Hickenlooper are going to be talking about this project, among other energy collaboration opportunities, but at that summit in mid-May in a couple of weeks. And so we're really excited that it's risen to that level, that they are engaged and supportive of this project and looking long-term for how we can work together really to make this a reality.
Great. So we've been kind of brushing past the Jordan Cove project has been kind of the central focus of this effort, because I think it was that one major infrastructure project that was hanging out there that seemed to be kind of the most logical outlet for a market for our natural gas that seems kind of trapped in the Rockies. I wonder, there's been a lot of movement, I think, with the new administration in Washington on large infrastructure projects. So, David, can you give us a quick snapshot on kind of where things might be at with that Jordan Cove project, but also talk about some of these other potential opportunities, Coastal Azul and a couple of these other things that we know have been swirling out there that might be have some ability to impact our market here in the Rockies?
Sure. So I guess first to address where is Jordan Cove as a project, and I apologize to those here today that maybe aren't as familiar. Sometimes we're living and breathing it and assume others are, but it's a project that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission staff recently said is the most comprehensive EIS they've ever seen. The reason for that is it's been done 3 times. This is the 3rd time that the project proponent, Pembina, has completed an EIS. They've submitted that to the FERC. They expect their public review comment period to be a 90-day public comment period to begin any time in the next few months, and I think that's going to provide ample opportunity for everyone in the room who's interested to get involved and let your voice be heard. And I think under this administration, they've telegraphed that, as was mentioned earlier by a different presenter, that environmental impact statements are going to probably not be measured in decades anymore, but rather hopefully in years. And I believe that the project feels confident they'll have their final FERC certificate, which is the main permit they need to begin construction by the end of 2018 or the first part of 2019. And I think from there, commercial discussions will intensify. Producers from the Uinta and the Piceance and the Pinedale and Wyoming will begin deciding how and if they want to participate. And I think that those conversations have already begun in some preliminary terms, and that's really exciting. But to Derek's question, second question, in some ways, Jordan Cove is an important project, but it's just a symbolic project in the context of the Western States Rural Natural Gas Initiative, because there are other things out there to focus on. The Coastal Azul export terminal south of the border in Baja is one that's already built. It just needs to be reversed, and that's a project that I know that that Mexico is working on right now. There's still projects in Canada that, while they wouldn't ship our gas, would take pricing pressure off of our gas if they had an outlet. Natural gas power generation. You can argue all day about what the best way to make electrons is, but for Western Colorado, the best way is natural gas. Why? Because of what we already talked about today with DOLA. It generates tremendous wealth for communities in ways that no other resource does. And so I think we can, through this project, talk about that. There's going to be Pacific Northwest. I'll give you one anecdote right now that's very interesting that I think this project could expand to beyond Jordan Cove. The Port of Tacoma has been working for many years, I believe over a decade, to convert all of their marine traffic, so the taxis, the water taxis, and the barges and the tugboats and the ships that have a consistent route, kind of like UPS trucks, to run on LNG, because there is a very significant and meaningful, measurable benefit to local air quality compared to burning kerosene or bunker fuel, which is essentially what all marine ships use right now. And that project is being stalled and stymied by organizations that nobody would be surprised to hear about, even though natural gas is a superior fuel in every measurable way to bunker fuel. Environmentally, how it's refined, how it's produced, but there's ideology hiding in these type of things. And I think this project, as Kathleen alluded to, it may not be something we focus on, but it's an example of where Colorado's robust regulatory structure, you could invite the mayor of Portland to come out and see what we do. You could go to Seattle and invite the city council to come out and with our commissioners and look at how we do things. I'd show anybody in the world Ursa's well pad over here at Battlement. It's the most conditioned pad in probably the history of the United States in terms of conditions of approval. And I think they're very proud of it, and they've shown they'll show it to anybody. So that's an example of, I think, where this could expand beyond just Jordan Cove and get into things that we haven't even envisioned yet. And I think that's the whole point of the partnership, is learning from Utah, learning from Wyoming, and vice versa on things that we haven't thought about yet.
I want to attend that dinner with Commissioner Justman and the mayor of Portland. So when that happens, would you please invite me? I'd appreciate that. So I think that we're kind of the only thing standing between everybody and lunch. So I do want to make sure we have a little bit of time for questions for our panel. If you get the microphone, please identify maybe who you're with and direct your question at whichever panelist you'd like to have answer it. Sorry, go ahead. Commissioner.
Do I get the mic first? Thank you. Thank you for being on this panel. This was something I was really looking forward to, and as you know, I'm very interested in this, and I hope everybody in this room, if they didn't know anything about Jordan Cove and so on, wants to know more and is excited about it. The point I wanted to make is, I guess, for next year's symposium, Kirby and I, and as well as the committee, we will be working on having people from hopefully Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Oregon here, and probably take about half a day and talk about Jordan Cove. We're really excited that we'll have the approval of the FERC by December. We've been told December, and we really hope things get popping and that $10 billion facility can be built. What a blessing to Western Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, the United States, and the world. Not just our nation, but other nations. And the possibility is unreal of getting that to Japan as well as all kinds of other Asian countries, and then other projects, because I have a feeling that once we get over there and we establish that, and we will, the appetite will only grow. So everybody that's here, this is one of the big things we're going to do in this symposium next year, and we'll probably invite, and I hope they come, people from Japan to come over here so we can have them see how excited we are. Just a short story. I'm taking a lot of time here, but just a short story. When we went out to Coos Bay, one of the things I was really worried about was how those people back there were concerned about what was going to happen. They had just had a vote, and their entire county, Coos County, voted 75% in favor of the project. Their concern was, how is it going to affect you in western Colorado? And it was interesting. It was so good to get the communication, because what I was worried about them, they were worried about us. We're on the same page. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Someone else? Yeah, right back here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. This is a tremendous project. I'm very grateful for you guys pushing it. David, could you just give a little bit of a timeline on a realistic, borderline optimistic, when gas could actually be flowing?
I think I don't want to be quoted on this if there's media in the room, because I don't have it in front of me, but I believe the schedule was 23, 24, assuming they got their FERC certificate in early 2019. Which sounds like a long time, but when you look at the market that we're targeting, it's a blink. And when you look at the resource that we have in the investment horizon to develop the Mancos Shale and other horizons in Uinta, I mean, it's not so long.
It was interesting when we were in Coos Bay how, and I'm inland person like most of us, and the Port Authority, I think they're called, but some of the city council and the commissioners and people from the community gave us a tour of where we could overlook the ocean and see how it worked. And what do I know? They told us how the ships had to be taken in by a Port Authority captain rather than just anybody, but how to port. They did not have the money. They had been in the logging business until the Spotted Owl came along, and their whole bay needs to be dredged, but they do not have the money for the dredging or maintain their port to make it a real viable thing in their community. And this project right here would probably generate the money for them to make their port even better than it is and maintain it, but the maintenance was a big item. And it explained how much water they needed, how deep the water had to be to get the ships in and out, and how it was, I think, silting in from the sides. And the people there were all, I was kind of shocked by how the ones we talked to were pro, get it done, how long before it's going to get done. And the other thing, that one of the things I remember was how high this plant had to be above the floodplain if they ever had a tsunami come in, and it's like way up in the air. But the engineering people were there that were working on it, and this gentleman had worked around the world and said it can be done. It's not impossible to do this, and if we're going to do it, we need to do it correctly.
Thank you. Who has a microphone? Someone else?
My name is Art Riddle. I'm from the town of Newcastle. My question is, just recently there was a facility that opened on Chesapeake Bay in southern Maryland called Cove Point. And they are gas, the Marcellus Basin in Pennsylvania. Have you ever looked at that as a model you're selling?
Go ahead.
Does anyone else want to weigh on this first? I know I've been talking a lot. Okay. Cove Point is different than this project in that it's considered a brownfield project, meaning it was already built as an import terminal. So the vast majority of the infrastructure was already in place. So Dominion, all they had to do was reverse it and add that liquefaction capacity going out. Jordan Cove is what they call a greenfield project. It's brand new. There's no infrastructure there except for the existing pipeline that gets us gas from here to Oregon. And so they're two different models. They have very different business models as well. Dominion's a much different type of company than Verison, now purchased by Pembina. And so I think it's a good project for us in the sense that we can claim that all basins in the United States right now have access to overseas market except for ours. And is that good policy? But in terms of being a sort of a good point of reference for Jordan Cove, I think they're different enough where it's problematic.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that? No. Okay, next question. Go ahead.
So I have to admit, I was not familiar with Jordan Cove or the Western States Rural Pipeline Initiative, so I totally just Googled it to figure out what we were talking about. But my question is, have you figured out how we're going to transport the gas to Oregon, or are there pipelines already in place? Or I'm curious about that aspect of it. I know we've talked about the agreements, but what are the workings on the ground?
Yeah, we did have a couple of project folks, I think, here last year at this symposium. They actually talked about kind of where they were at in that pipeline project, but you go ahead if you don't mind kind of giving us an update on that.
The Piceance Basin infrastructure, as I alluded to earlier, was basically designed around the idea that we'd have 100 rigs, and we've got 7 or 8. So the Ruby pipeline going that already is built, it's owned by Kinder Morgan and the company who's permitting Jordan Cove 50/50, already goes out to Oregon. It's there. The remaining segment called the Pacific Connector, while it sounds like a large length to run, in terms of interstate pipelines, is just a little piece. So the pipeline infrastructure is already in place, and that's one of the benefits of our project, is that in Canada, you have to transverse significant geologic distance with all kinds of complexities and all kinds of costs. Here, the pipeline's basically already there, so you're just building the liquefaction facility.
Thanks. Other questions? Yes, back there.
Hi, just a quick question on sort of in the weeds on the pipeline. That Pacific Connector portion of the pipeline, would it be considered an interstate or an intrastate pipeline, because there's very different permitting processes for those different types of pipelines?
Well, the Pacific Connector is connected to the liquefaction terminal in terms of its permitting through their environmental impact statement. It's basically an extension of the liquefaction terminal. I'm not sure what the right nomenclature is in terms of, I don't know the nuance of the FERC regulatory nuance, but I think it's an interstate pipeline, but I wouldn't want to be quoted on that.
Other questions? Guessing everybody's hungry. Is that probably what's happening? Yeah.
Lunch's a little bit late, so we've got about another 4 or 5 minutes. So if there's questions.
Kirby's saying stretch, so who wants to stretch here? Yes, please, ma'am.
You mentioned bringing Wyoming into the coalition. You mentioned bringing Wyoming into the coalition. Is there thought to bringing New Mexico in as well?
Kathleen, you want to take that?
Sure. I think ultimately, I think the more partners we have, the stronger the effort. We've barely begun our conversations with Wyoming, and I think New Mexico is probably the next logical engagement. And so, yeah, I mean, I think for the purposes of the study, we're focusing on Utah and Colorado, just to sort of set that baseline. But it would certainly, as we get additional interest from other states, or we engage and try to get them to partner with us on these efforts, we could expand that. I think there's a lot of opportunity in there.
I think Mike's point about kind of if you sort of look at the Rockies holistically, you can sort of realize that there aren't a lot of export opportunities for any of these states, frankly. So my sense is, as this gets traction and we sort of continue to elevate the profile of this, those states are going to be coming to us saying, how can we be involved in this effort for San Juan Basin or for Pinedale, et cetera. It's going to be sort of a magnet, is my sense. Rose?
No, I agree, and I wanted to tag on to that because, for Mesa County and a lot of our surrounding counties, the ability to have contracts in place for over 20 years with the ability to stabilize the fluctuations in our markets, so that boom and bust we always talk about, and the ability for local governments to continue investments in diversifying our economy to just make our economy stronger. I think once that message gets out and people see us doing that, there is definitely going to be more momentum amongst other states to be involved in that process, because especially as you go west and our counties are over at least on this side, are over 60 or 70% federal lands. We don't have a lot of opportunities to diversify otherwise, and so we need to take every opportunity we can. We have an abundance of the resource, and so marketing that is going to be very important. And so I think getting that message out to others that we communicate with will be really important, and I do think it will start more of a momentum in other states.
Mike had a comment.
If I could just tag on how valuable those federal funds coming into local communities are. In Utah, the federal monies, excuse me, they're divided a little bit different than they are here in Colorado. So with those mineral lease monies, and I go back to 2008, we had $127 million generated in mineral lease money just out of Uena County. 51% of that goes to the federal government, 49% back to the state of Utah. But of that 49% that comes back to the state of Utah, 40% goes directly to the county from where that came from.
We would love that.
But on top of that, you have your DOLA board. We have what's called the Permanent Community Impact Board, and 32.5% of those funds go into that board that goes to our rural counties, our rural cities, for the very kind of things you talked about here, for water, sewer, roads, golf courses, whatever that, the community wants.
Great, thank you. I think we're getting the hook for lunch, so please join me in thanking our panel for the discussion today.